So I'm pretty sure today is Tuesday, and I think it's 1:54 p.m. And from the compass I've been given, I'm pretty sure it's June 16th, in the year after the one we called zero, 2015. When I was a child, this moment was distant science fiction. For most of my young life, this moment was so far in the future that it's actually hard to make a frame that would make sense of what we saw as coming when I was younger in the future, that would be here long before this time. But you can watch television and see what we saw, right? So back when I was younger, 1990 was the distant future. And in 1990, we imagined world peace. We'd be living in space on other worlds. And we'd have incredible infrastructures of education and communal endeavor in thriving ecologies that were well protected and understood. So profound would be our advancement that we'd have stopped using combustion engines long before 1990, right? And would be using something amazing and safe environmentally, at least compared to combustion engines. So we imagined amazing futures, and we lived in a calendar made of numbers. And the numbers seemed to imply things, but we had no idea what, because the only thing that they really implied was that, boy, were we going to make some amazing machines real soon. And these amazing machines would give us so much liberty and so much luxury that we'd learn how to be intelligent animals in a living ecology again. And we'd stop attacking everything in sight, including our own minds and each other, in 12 new ways each moment for 15 new reasons of commerce, or what we call commerce. And we probably wouldn't even need prisons anymore at all, and there'd never be anything like prisons again. And, one could imagine that really the role of the police would be something like an intelligent, friendly superhero that could keep things from ever reaching a point so overboiling where, violence or killing or even arrest would even become necessary. So we had visions of the future. Yeah? But what I want to get at is really provocative. And I'm actually really worried about trying to talk about this because I've just noticed it and I'm not sure how to approach it. But I started to wonder what cash is. And of course I've wondered this many times. But this morning I got an unusual answer. Cash is a replacement for identity. Which means if you got enough cash, it doesn't matter what your identity is. And not only that, people will pretend that your identity, who you are, right, is really valuable and important, worthy of protection, rescue, if you've got enough cash. Or if you've got enough power, right? Usually those two go together, but not always. So the really weird thing about cash is that it becomes a replacement for identity. If you don't have any cash, you don't have any identity. Whatever your identity might be doesn't matter because you don't have the cash to back it up, right? Now, cash is an interesting word because it doesn't take much imagination to extend it into cachet, right? So, and in a particular meaning of this word, cachet sort of means it's complex to explain it, but it's something like And it's not an abstract quality, it's a quality in human social situations, right? So it's not numbers. Cachet means one's value and influence in a social relationship of any kind or situation, or even in representational environments like businesses. One's influence, one's ability to marshal and direct, acquire, and sustain influence in social groups, whether that influence is merited or not, right? So in representations, the goal is to have the cachet, whether it's merited or not, right? Because maybe even the group itself is a fiction. Whereas in authentic social contexts that we can make and become together, you can't fake cachet. Doesn't matter how much money you have. Doesn't matter how much power you have, because those representations are recognized as illusory the moment the context becomes real. And we have this funny slang in modern times, getting real. So it doesn't matter how much cachet you have if you misdrive your car and smash it into other cars and things, blah, blah, blah. In terms of the accident itself, your cachet might protect you because you had a more well-designed car and things, but it won't change any of the forces or repercussions of the accident, especially for others. In fact, the more cash or cachet you have, the more other things and beings and situations will have to absorb the results of anything harmful and unintelligent that you do. And many times they'll have to absorb those results either without complaint, or they might, if you have enough cachet, they might have to thank you for having harmed them, as though the fact that they were harmed by you and for you is so important that it's actually a kind of a benefit. All of course based on fictions, right, of who's got more cash or who's got more cachet. Now, of course, in lower domains of culture where real cash and real power are just being mimicked, we don't even have those, right? We just have a lot of people sort of pumping and emulating the dances of the elite. And nowhere is this more prevalent than in what is presently known, at least in our part of the United States, on the West Coast, as pop music. It's a kind of a shocking, cartoonish parody that anyone who could see through would find both anthropologically fascinating, as in a study of what's going on circa 2015, and what we got instead of utopia. But it would also reveal that the ideas on offer in our public spaces are so counterfeited that they're counterfeits of counterfeits of counterfeits of anything even vaguely human, intelligent, authentic, alive, creative, imaginary, and so on. In fact, a lot of them are just counterfeits of schemas of counterfeits. Someone had a schema that worked, so we just start reproducing 12 different things in a similar schema and make money with that. But so what is all this cash thing? And before I go too far, and I want to come back to the fact that it's a replacement for identity, as long as you've got cash, you don't need an identity, right? As long as you've got the ability to do a job well, it doesn't matter what your identity is, you have a job, right? That becomes a good portion of your identity, if not its basis. So that if you lose your job, again, you no longer have an identity. And you don't have the cash to support a fake identity either, in a bunch of fake constructs where you have to pay everyone to have a phony identity that isn't even you. So you have to make cash to pay to have a fake identity that isn't you. Right? We all have to do this. And we'll even get arrested and stuff if we don't do that. And none of us seem to be aware of much of this, although we're all intuitively aware of it. We all feel it, right? In our souls, in our hearts, in the urgent parts of our minds that, like children, are suffering something they're not equipped to articulate, even perhaps to themselves, because it's so prevalent and invasive in so many domains at once that it's hard to even organize anything like a human mind or an intelligence or a creative approach to learning and relating with the difference between the possibilities of our actually real authenticity and all of the stuff that competes with them. And one of the things that competes with them is physical beauty, right? So that if you're attractive enough, again, it kind of doesn't matter, quote unquote attractive enough. If you're attractive enough, it doesn't really matter what your identity is because you have cachet. And we've seen plenty of parodies and jokes about this in social media and such, right? What it's like for a very attractive woman to walk into a bar. I remember seeing one video parody of this. On the bright side, yeah. And then on the dark side of that, beauty, be it male, female, or children, whatever kind, right? On the dark side of it is everyone wants a piece of it for every wrong reason. So they're actually both dark sides. The first side is your beauty gives you cachet, so that doesn't really require that you have an identity or develop one. And that has two sort of properties. One is that you get a lot of benefits, and the other is that nobody sees you, who you are. You may not even find out or become who you are, or be able to see who you are, so that beauty and its effects in social and relational situations can just destroy you, or even destroy the possibility of there being in you. Meanwhile, you'll be rewarded and celebrated in all kinds of ways that have nothing to do, perhaps, with whoever it is or you aren't being inside yourself, right? So that's going to be a terribly confusing experience for every single person, but especially for those people who seem to be somewhere up near the upper standards of some fictional, yet popular, idea of beauty. Or intelligence, or athletic prowess, or vocational prowess, or any of the things that replace our real identity with some kind of a convenient token or constantly held status, right? So that someone who is great in one moment is just presumed to be great in all other moments, and should it be discovered that they're actually human, or that their greatness was the disappearance of themselves into something amazing, everyone will be shocked. And now we get to something even more interesting, which is, what does it mean to have a true identity, right? What does it mean to have an identity that isn't based on whether one is attractive or not, whether one wears the right clothing, whether one has expensive or inexpensive tastes and habits, whether one is verbally articulate or not, whether one is artistically articulate or not, but rather how and who we are and why and where we come together for each other and for purposes that matter, right? So that identity doesn't become something held as if in the pocket of each of us, like we've got one, right? Which was never true anyway. Part of why we have cash instead of cachet, instead of actual personation together, right? So the more that any kind of social situation, the more that it becomes structured, the more it requires a structured hierarchy. The more that happens, the more that becomes representational. Pretty soon it's pure representation. And all of the actual structure in the hierarchy is all mixed up. The important person is maybe even being killed. The least important person is leading everything and dominating everyone. And I don't just mean that there's a most important or least important person. I mean that in every situation, who would be important can differ, and how the group would constellate should differ intelligently in every situation, right? Because each person has unique assets, and they change in different contexts. So instead of recognizing that and having a fluid sort of reconstellating intelligence in our groups, we just put one guy or girl at the top, and then we build a structure based on a lot of confusing social and possibly sexual dynamics. We just put some structure in there, and that's supposed to function as intelligence. Right? But what about if the least important person is exactly the one who knows the most intelligent thing to do for the group, not for himself or herself, next? And not only cannot speak, but would be punished for doing so, which is, of course, the situation in almost all of our vocational lives and much of our social situations. Why? Well, cash has a lot to do with it, right? It really does. And what would it be like if we played the other way? Well, it's something like what we're doing now, right? Cash isn't involved. I'm not here as the representative of myself or of any specific group, kind of hoping we can learn and see into some things that are really important about being human and becoming intelligent and understanding what it means to be alive on Earth together. So that's not too bad a purpose. And we're kind of playing with our humanity for a moment, even though I'm really just talking into a box. I'm imagining you with me, us together, for each other, trying to understand this incredibly dangerous, puzzling, and ugly situation where cash matters, humanity, identity, ecology, relation doesn't, or matters as an afterthought or something. And so too with power, and so too with things like defense, whatever the hell that means when it's just a word in isolation. So too with education, same problem that we have with defense. So too with the environment. I mean, the environment is everything in space-time, right? All the way down to every organism on Earth. So we're just going to collapse all the frameworks into the environment and talk about that like it's disposable? Really? Or like all those frameworks can just be collapsed into one that we can manipulate as though we know what we're talking about? Because we don't. So we're just trying to kind of learn something about how peculiar it is to be human intelligences with representational minds in cultures that are fictional, unintelligent, non-self-advancing, but produce mad technologies, endless machines, and representations like that's the most important thing there could ever possibly be. And then we move into them, little boxes and things, in our minds first, and then our bodies into boxes, filled with boxes of boxes of boxes. And we imagine somehow that this is being alive, or having an identity. It isn't, because identities only emerge and arise and develop in true relation. And what you get in fictional relations, or relations that are mostly constructs, is mostly something other than identity. And for that, you're going to need a lot of cash. And you're going to have to find ways to fake or manipulate situations so that you can get cachet. Which means all kinds of provocative stunts and acting out and addiction and violence and yelling and self-inflation and attacking and police and crime, wars, and all kinds of crazy things, right? Which you don't have to take my word for. You can just look around and see none of us are very intelligent. As collectives, we're extremely unintelligent. Our protectors have turned to predators. The things that are supposed to benefit us are poisoning us and everything else. Money is the opposite of wealth. Technology is the opposite of intelligence and humanity. And something's gone horribly wrong. There's no mystical cult that has anything like the answer. Pretending you can just walk back into the forest is certainly not going to work. Pretending we can get rid of machines or stop having collectives, or that they should just be democratic or communist, is insane and ridiculous. And again, just a bunch of traps in language. And we're in a place where we have to discover, A, what the hell happened? In clear, really highly structurally intelligent, tactically aware terms. And what got lost? What got replaced? How? Why? Where? What can we do instead? What can we be instead? What does an authentic human mind or collective begin to look like when we understand what it doesn't look like, which is most of what we are doing, most of the time, in nearly every context. And even in the context where we're doing something like humanity, today, 15 of those outside fictional contexts will invade that one, and tomorrow 30. So every single context within our minds and bodies and lives has been, for the past 25, 30 years, being recursively reinvaded by fictions of that destroy our possibilities of having humanity or intelligence, communion, collectivity, insight, awareness, learning, and replacing them with broken representations and replicas. You can see it in every aspect of our culture. I don't need to point anywhere particular. But if you just listen to, take, 20 minutes, listen to pop music from radio stations in 1972. And then do the same thing in 2015. And whether you enjoy the pop music from 1972 or not isn't really the issue. But rather just compare the complexity and diversity and depth of what was happening on the radio before there was an internet, and what was happening for the past, approximately 25 years since our culture really began to fall into what Alvin Toffler prophetically described as future shock. So we've orbited some pivots around identity and cash and the difference between having a human identity, which usually means living and learning and caring with and for other beings in real, authentically human and ecologically and relationally intelligent situations that we make and become together, right? It means something like service with and for each other and thus ourselves. And it also kind of means the disappearance of the self into wonderful expressions of action and relation. Right? So it's not so much like a hardening of the self, but rather a transparency, a kind of transparency where, yes, I'm still here, I'm still Darren, but most of Darren's concerns and worries and ideas are missing because now we are together making and being and learning and growing and healing and protecting, nurturing. Yeah? We're doing human things, And without a lot of really authentic experiences of that, it will be impossible for us to acquire an identity. So that some of us will manage to do that even though we're buried in fictional conflicts, and those of us will develop an identity. Some of those people will even make some cash too, and of course it's a matter of degree. But most of the young people will never see clearly that there's even an option to develop an identity. All they will see is that there are slots that the culture will pay you to inhabit. And there are other slots that they will not pay you or punish you for inhabiting. And so it becomes a kind of a sieve, yeah? A banking system of different ways of removing personal creativity, agency, unique gifts and faculties, assets, birthrights, membership in nature, the history of humanity, and so on, and then replacing those with essentially digits and functions, analyses, and pay grades. But remember, in the beginning, I talked about the date and what time it is. And here's the really astonishing thing that I can't stop recognizing. I have no idea what time it is. None whatsoever, because the only thing I've ever known is a mechanical calendar that has nothing to do with any relationships at all, except one that's abstracted. And that is the orbital relationship of the sun abstracted into a circle. A circle of degrees that approach 360. That's the only one. And that's merely, any two objects can have that relationship, right? So that's just a pure abstraction. But I know that right outside my door, where there is any living thing, any insect, any tree, any bird, creatures with true identity, yet no names. Creatures with whom no addresses or statistics are associated, except perhaps provisionally, or unless humans have gone in and marked them and done this. There's a living calendar that always knows what today is. And it doesn't know it according to a system. It's intimate with this day and all of the days and the history of days and the history of all of those kinds of creatures, whatever they are, and the history of all their relationships with all the other creatures, whatever those are, and all of the plants and the ecologies and the oceans, the skies, the mountains, the deserts, all of everything, right? So there's an actual calendar, it's alive, in and as the living world. And just like the difference between having mechanical fake relationships dictated to you by a machine, and having actual relationships where you love and grow and have heroic adventures and rescue one another and laugh and play and learn, right? Just like the difference between, I don't know what, a day at a prison and a day in a context that's true and authentic and intelligent and exciting. That is the difference between our relationship with time, as we understand it, as most of us as humans, and reality, where all of time is living relationships. So I have no idea what time it is. I'm in a box, talking into a box to people who will probably be listening to me through boxes. And all of us obey clocks and calendars and have, most of us, very little connection. Although our bodies are absolutely undisconnectable from all of this. But in our minds, we have very little connection with living time. What have we got? Well, something like the equivalent of cash, right? Instead of understanding and relating with the identity of the living moment on Earth and in all of the living things right next to and around us, and with us, that we are made of, that we emerge with and for, and as an example of the entire history of, right? Instead of having any sense of that at all, we have a 12-page book divided into boxes. So we have a box, and in the box there are 12 boxes, and in each of those boxes there are either, I don't know what, 28 or 29 for one of them, 30 or 31 for the rest, boxes. These are arranged in groups of 7. Yeah, that's kind of interesting, but it's not clear why it would be. Yeah? And then, if we're lucky, one of those boxes in that book might have a circle in it, or maybe even 2. Each page in the box might have 2 circles. One might be the full moon, and one might be the new moon. And that would be the memory of some kind of authentic relationship with reality. But what does time mean? No one knows. We've turned it into a commodity, much like identity. It's all been turned into representations and cash. It used to be a living sense from which we could draw our own understanding and a real pivot of our intelligence and identity, knowing how it is today with all the living beings all around us that we relate with, knowing what the birds are doing, what the insects are doing, what the plants are doing, why they're doing it, how these relationships are important, how they are meaningful far outside of statistics, knowing what they're doing today, why today, knowing what the sun is being today, differently from how it was being yesterday, knowing what the sky is being today, differently from yesterday, yet connected in a pattern, yeah? A living, intelligent pattern back into the origins of life and the origins of ourselves each morning when we awaken. So that a relationship with living time, like a relationship with human identity, is to be with and for other beings. And sometimes almost as them. To be with and for nature as nature, not as you in nature. To be with and for other beings as a human intelligence, not as you, right? When someone is accidentally heroic, if they're honest, and many people have a hard time not being when this has happened, they'll excuse themselves of the heroism and say something like, I don't even know what happened, it doesn't even seem like I did it. They're telling the truth. They disappeared in the service. They did what anyone would do. What they actually mean is, I was everyone doing something and I wasn't myself for a moment. Everyone did this through me. It's kind of maybe even how they feel. Or like the history of humanity of everyone couldn't stand the fact that that child was being hurt, and so I disappeared in that history, just walked up and said, hey, stop that. Or that some environment was being obliterated, a treasure that belongs to the entire body of life and the history of life on Earth, was being just wiped out for some dollars or because someone had some concept or statement that they thought was more valuable. Right? Well then, it's not me that comes forward and objects so much as it is something that's, I'm disappearing and something more intelligent is coming out. And similarly, there's the opposite, right? I can disappear into an act of rage or self-defense or self-aggrandizement or violence just as completely, but in the opposite direction. It's like the balance of myself disappears and I become pure representation, pure, and I'm gone in that direction too, so that it doesn't feel like I was me when I hurt someone later at all. It feels like I wasn't myself. So there's sort of two ways. One is we disappear into service and learning, adventure, heroism, and intelligence together. Or we disappear into the reaction, into some kind of incredibly reactive expression of our profound pain, fear, and frustration at just not being able to be authentic, even inside ourselves, right? And that disappearance is really very similar. In the aftermath, it certainly doesn't feel like I did it. To varying degrees in various situations. But you can see the difference between someone who's sort of thinking their way through a violent act or acting out, say taking a dangerous drug or something, thinking their way through it, and someone who's just suddenly missing from themselves and just acts out, right? And maybe has this pattern. So it's really interesting. All these things are non-related, with no connection to living time, which means really living relations, and not just with human beings. It must be also with ecologies, since we're human beings are the expression of ecologies. So we can't like put those aside and go, well, we'll relate really intelligent with human beings, but never mind the ecologies. That doesn't work. It's the same thing with the calendar. Or we'll relate really well with human beings, but we won't have any sense of what living time is about. We'll just have a calendar. And for relating with the human beings, we'll just have cash. Right? You can see how this isn't going to even slightly work ever one time. And even if it seems to work in the moment, there are 12 invisible ways in which it's doing the opposite of working that are going to come back and bite us. And by the time they do, they'll be 24 or 48 and so on. So there's a living calendar. And we have the opportunity, the obligation, to, as part of becoming human together and intelligent, to learn how, again, to participate and relate with the real living calendar in nature that doesn't obey any specific system. It is what it is. There's no overlay you can put on it that's better, right? You can't make an overlay that shows you what's in there. You have to go into the relationships yourself and participate in them to find out anything about it at all. And if you start out with an overlay that's deceptive or self-aggrandizing, or highly representational, meaning missing most of the content, having kind of the skeletal remains of it, it won't help you. Things will get worse. It's the same thing in identity. Right? Identity is strangely something that we acquire by giving it away. And we love the people who give it away best and most beautifully. We love these people most. Right? So it's almost really weird. It's totally unlike cash. It's the opposite of cash. It's something you have to share and give away to get any of. Right? And cachet is the same thing. You have cachet when you lift others above you, not when you stand above them, aggrandizing your own magnificence in some domain. Right? But when your magnificence, however it may be true, when your skillful humanity, your heartful compassion, when your sensitive, uncompromising care and wonder and intelligence in relation lift everyone around you, you don't become the star, but you might become the pivot around which that little pod can be excellent. Yeah. And they all become stars. And rather than looking like the thumb or the index finger, maybe you look more like the wrist or the palm of a hand. Yeah? No one even notices the wrist. No one mentioned that a wrist played the concerto on the piano. Right? That part didn't get any mention, but if you think carefully, I think you'll understand that it has a really crucial role. The more invisible it is, the more crucial the role is in this case. So yeah, it's weird. We learn and acquire richness of personal identity, not as a status or something that can be had or held, preserved even for a moment, but only in true relation, only in doing and being human and intelligent and, how shall I put it, animals, organisms, creatures of time, space, and this world in this moment together. Right? And part of that depends on us being directly connected to the living calendars, not by representations, but by communion, by relation with them. By learning with and as and for and from them about what it means to be human, which is how we acquired our intelligence, with which we build books and authorities, technologies and representational frameworks. We acquired this intelligence from the living calendar and the living relationships within it. And in order to correct that intelligence, we're going to have to discover new ways that have nothing to do with magic, because they're not about stories. They have to do with actual relationships. We don't need any extra overlays. We can play with those of science, and those are very useful, but should not dominate what we learn. But when we come to nature, we have to take off all the human cultural overlays and try and see what's there as clearly as possible as nature, not as frameworks we acquired from thinking or storybooks or magic books or books from God or books from science or anyone. We have to go and actually try to discover what is the spirit of time in nature. And not as researchers, but as participants, right? Which means we have to request admittance to these relationships successfully and gain it. And they will not, we will not pass the gate with fictions. No. Cash won't help you. Cachet will mean nothing. The only thing that really works in nature, other than cunning, and it can work to a degree, but not in relationships, only in predation. In nature, what really works is authenticity and very intimate co-awareness. Identities aren't set in nature. They're in a cloud state. And there are many astonishing features of these relationships that I don't have time to show you here. But when we begin to relate authentically with nature, and by that I mean living places, living cycles, living things, sincerely and intelligently, as participants, not observers, then and only then may we become capable of discovering what it means to be human, or even intelligent, or an individual. And a lot of what that's going to mean is going to look like an explicit conflict between most of what we've thought, said, been, done, believed, and been really attending anywhere outside of that. Much the same with getting cash, right? When we relate with each other authentically in contexts that are that matter and are deeply intelligently purposeful, suddenly we realize, very obviously, that almost everything else we were doing was both fake, toxic, somehow a reaction to not having been able to do this together, and so on. In other words, most of the problem is that we have so few places to become and learn what it means to be human together. And again, intelligent, animals, organisms, beings in time and space, right? So few places, because every place that could be that is already filled with something else. And we can't even go into those places and correct them. It's impossible. So in most cases, we just have to build a new context together, right? We have to not build, but become a new context together in which we are doing that. And hopefully, this far too long bird walk of mine has been at least catalytic in that direction, if not successful in creating such a bubble. I hope to explore these and related topics in person, and also in future conversations. So thank you for joining me. I hope you'll continue to consider and reflect on these things. Ask your own questions, chase them. I think you'll find they lead to very astonishing opportunities that aren't much like answers, but can become amazingly clear ways of seeing that are very useful in a variety of contexts in which it can be difficult to discern fiction from relation.